Welcome to Rising Tide Startups, where today's most exciting startup founders share their stories and strategies. They also deliver tangible lessons learned along the way that you can apply to your own startup. Each episode is a true masterclass. Make sure you take notes. Take it away, Kevin.
This is Kevin Pruitt with another episode of Rising Tide Startups, and my special guest today is Josh Gilbert. Josh, thanks for joining us on Rising Tide.
Great to be here, Kevin.
So, Josh, we've had a great little chat offline before we hit the big red record button. But so it's interesting. But my family and I lived in the UK for 12 years, and so it was like 20 minutes south of where Josh's office is in London. But Josh, if you and I met at a networking event in the beautiful city of London, how would you introduce yourself to me?
I would introduce myself as Josh, the CEO at Sust Global. I have a bio that I send out actually. So when I'm at speaking events, right, it says, Josh, he's done this, he's been there. And at the end of it, I always put, Josh wishes he had more time to play music and Dungeons and Dragons. So they're the two things outside of work that I imagine that I still get to play both of these things, and I don't anymore. So it depends what kind of setting, and I'd maybe go between the important business bits and the more silly bits.
So give me the elevator pitch of what is Sust Global. And it's sustglobal.com, correct?
Correct, yes. So at Sust Global, we provide climate analytics and APIs. So we basically turn all of the complexity of climate science into business intelligence. So that's, you can imagine climate risks like risk of wildfire, risk of flooding, risk of sea level rise, and the GHG emissions output from from assets like tangible assets, locations, properties, portfolios. And we provide this analytics via these APIs to large corporates, blue chip investors, global financial data providers, and enable them to basically build cool stuff on top of this foundational climate data layer.
So is this related to green certifications? Is this related to just impact? What is the kind of the arena, or is it all the above?
I mean, it's definitely a niche within that, right? Like I talk to people a lot about how we're entering the climate economy. Like everything will be touched by climate change, unfortunately, but also, climate will become something that's really integral to every business practice, all of our, awareness at home. But the progress is not evenly distributed. And if we look at this climate economy and compare it to like the web economy kind of 20 years ago, we're kind of in the pets.com moment of the climate economy. There's a lot of greenwashing, there's a lot of BS, there's a lot of even ESG, which is environment, social, and governance, which is kind of the new kind of darling on Wall Street. Like they're saying something like a third of all assets under management are going to be ESG. But these three things are entirely different, right? Like environment is very different to social, is very different to governance.
Right.
And we really need to have better validation of what we mean when we say green, what we mean when we say climate resilient, or what we mean when we say net zero, right? Everyone wants to get to net zero. So we use satellite data, we use machine learning, we use global climate models, and we effectively provide an objective source of truth to make sure that we understand the risks that are coming towards us, and we also understand the impacts that we have on the planet through our emissions.
So I'm interested to hear, kind of the story. This is like the founder's, timeline. So walk me through your A levels to is it School of Arts and Sciences that you went to, University of London? Is that what SOAS stands for?
SOAS stands for the School of Oriental and African Studies, which is a department within the University of London.
See, I changed your whole degree program. I had you in the arts and sciences.
Well, interestingly, SOAS is kind of the kind of zany kind of child in the kind of University of London. So when I was there, it's great because there's loads of really passionate people. Obviously, I did international development and economics. So we looked at the economics of Africa. I wrote my dissertation on price volatility in Zambian copper markets, super kind of nerdy kind of economics based stuff. But from that lens of kind of developmental progress, an amazing university, kind of very passionate people. They're famous students. They're famous for basically like kind of protesting about anything. So, you know, constantly outside protesting to people, constantly kind of, you know, making sure that the university is being held to account, and that, you know, the kind of anything from really important stuff like the wages of cleaners at the university, right? Like which 18 to 21-year-olds go out and like kind of protest that kind of stuff. Like it's kind of really inspiring. But through that process, you know, I failed stats a couple of times, which was a challenge because I did come from a kind of more arts background. So I had to do a lot of catching up. But it really opened my eyes to some of the innovations that were coming in that could drive society forward. So I kind of became obsessed with off-grid solar as one of my first entry points, right? I kind of, how do you leapfrog technologies in somewhere like Africa, kind of have, you know, solar kind of based renewable power sources.
Unlimited sunshine.
Where you don't have a grid. Yeah, a lot of sunshine. Yeah, so I finished my degree, and funnily enough, right, I found one of my old course books the other day, and I'd written, it might have been a diary or a course book, some pads that I dug out from my time there. And I literally wrote in this pad, my life plan for the next 5 years, right? And it was get 2 years of experience in a job and then start a startup that will change the world. And I saw it was actually 3 years experience rather than 2, but I was like, huh, like that stuff works. So
pretty prophetic.
That was cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of, especially in England, right? There's a lot of negativity on some of the, you know, the kind of believe, achieve, succeed kind of the mantras kind of stuff. In the US, it's a lot more prevalent. Like, you know, before I was at SOAS, you know, I lived in Philadelphia for 4 years growing up. So I kind of feel like I grew up in London and in Philly, kind of have this shared kind of this split between, you know, the gritty streets of London and the gritty streets of Philly, you know, made me quite gritty in the end. But, you know, I really believe a lot in that kind of mindset and, you know, setting your mind to something, like thinking like, how do I get to that place? So my interest in solar and technology led me to work at a place called Cleantech Group. As a data analyst, I became their lead data analyst there, basically looking at like new technologies that were climate and clean tech focused, how, you know, corporates and finances and all of these different firms could use this new data. And I became pretty much obsessed with satellite and geospatial data, you know, saying, look at all of these new sources of insights coming online, all of these new ways to capture information on what's happening on planet Earth. And like, everything I'd done to that point was consulting based in my career. And I was like, hang on, tech can mean we can do this at scale. We can not just build like venturable businesses, but we can create the type of impact that we really want to drive at scale instead of doing this one-to-one. So I basically became a super fan of satellite and geospatial data. I wasn't a technical expert by any means. I just had my kind of ropey understanding of statistics and kind of data analytics. But I founded Sust Global, and it was just a dormant company. I was just like, I want to do this. This is a cool name. This is what I want to do. This is the area. But I don't really know how I'm going to get there yet. And I wrote a lot of research, a lot of papers on the potential for geospatial and satellite data. I was obviously applying that in my role in climate and clean tech. And a US-based startup called Orbital Insight, you know, they're Sequoia-backed. You know, I think they've raised the best part of 50 or 100 million now. You know, NASA, ex-NASA CEO, founder, super smart people. They picked up some of my research and they said, okay, we're launching this new product line. Do you want to kind of come in on a consulting project and help us launch this upcoming product, kind of bringing some of these insights? So I flew over to Mountain View, you know, met with the team there, worked with them, still working at Cleantech Group as a consultant. Obviously, Silicon Valley, as an outsider, as a UK-based person, never been to California. It's where dreams are made, and it's where dreams were made. I met my co-founder on a panel on satellite geospatial data, how it can drive sustainability. A guy called Gopal, Erin Jiparath. His background, you know, he came from Kerala originally. He moved to the United States for college. You know, basically, when I met him, he was the head of analytics and insights at another big startup called Planet Labs. They kind of have the largest ever commercial satellite kind of constellation in the history of mankind. So they're monitoring everything all of the time. He was leading up their analytics function. And we kind of hit it off. We started writing a couple of papers together ourselves. It's very much like starting out a like meeting a founder and getting to the stage where you start a company together, it's weirdly like kind of dating someone at the start of a relationship.
You are not the first person that said that.
Yeah, you know, there's this kind of
Absolutely
flirting
true.
stage.
You have a work wife and
saying,
home wife.
Actually, there's something there.
Yeah.
There's something there. You haven't quite crossed the line. Then you kind of ask each other out. You're like, hey, we could do this. So we said, hey, we could do this. I said, it just so happens I've got this dormant company waiting for us to get going. And you know, we got going. You know, I'm happy to jump into a little bit more about kind of the journey since then, but that's the origin. That's the origin story, I guess, that kicked it all off.
So I've got a question here that I've got to chase. This is one of those rabbits that it's interesting to hear this, you know, this dating analogy that you brought up, because it is so true. And I mean, some major unicorns, you know, have gone through this dating relationship to find their co-founders. But so often when that dating relationship comes together and one person has kind of had the initial idea and the other person has a very needed skill set, you know, to kind of piggyback, so to speak, on this and make it scale. What was the arrival at, how do we split the shares? Because that seems to be such a sticking point, because so often the person who had the original idea wants to kind of maintain at least 51%, you know, of this, or 60%. And it seems to be a rub so often with the co-founder that says, actually, you can't do this without me. So we're 50-50. So how did you navigate that relationship?
So before I started Sust, I spoke to a couple of friends of my dad's who had tried startups, failed startups, not even startups, just, you know, like, you know, ideas, new companies, whatever. Some of them become successful, but like one of the best pieces of advice, or one of the most prominent pieces of advice I had, was never go 50-50 with your co-founder. It will always lead to pain and struggle down the road. And I ignored it completely.
As one does. That's right.
Yeah, as a founder, you have to have a certain level of like kind of contrarian within you, right? So sure. We recognized, or rather, I guess I recognized, but we both recognized that we needed each other. And I also recognized, I was like, look, this is a marathon, not a sprint, and it's binary. You either succeed or you don't.
Yep. It's a win-win or a lose-lose.
Exactly. Yeah, we decided to you know, share, split down the middle, and you know, even though I'm the CEO, Gopal is the CTO, and head of products, you know, kind of leading up the product and tech side, we kind of tackle things pretty collaboratively, full stop. And the great thing is splitting the shares. We're both as invested as each other. It's meant that one of us may have the kind of deciding vote on any specific topic based upon our expertise or our position. Yep. But in my experience, it's really created that kind of kinship and togetherness that has seen us through the darkest days, you know, where at any point in a founder's journey, everybody has the war story where you're like, wow, that was the moment. And there's probably brutal. More than one. Yeah. You know, we have them along the way, and our relationship as co-founders is just the most important thing, full stop. You know, like if this works out, we'll go on and probably do something else together. If this doesn't work out, we could well go on and do something together. So I think investing in that bond has been one of the most important things, you know, and as much as there's lots of technical challenges, there's lots of growth challenges, there's lots of team building challenges, having that trust between you, not just as co-founders, as a team, it's kind of, I'm realizing that's just the most important thing.
I mean, it's interesting. I had a friend of mine who has a tech startup in St. Louis, Missouri, and we were talking about this very issue about, you know, divided shares, and he said, you realize that Jeff Bezos doesn't own 51% of Amazon, right? He said he owns about 9% of Amazon, but he has the controlling, you know, 9% of Amazon. So it's interesting that how that conversation is a kind of a front end conversation, and then as over time it just works out to a completely different scenario. But I love the way that you've approached that, and it's, what was the driving factor? The driving factor was, we need each other to succeed, and we both realize that, and we will defer in the other's area of expertise. What a great, relationship that, business relationship that you created there. So when exactly did Sust Global begin?
Well, the company was founded in September 2018. I left to go full time in September 2019. And
that's post NASA call.
Yeah, exactly. Post work there, and then I would say it really started kicking off. Gopal joined kind of. He'd been providing advice and advising, kind of saying, look, we should probably do this. Let's support each other. And he joined soon after that. So early 2020 was really kind of the proper jump off point of no return point for both of us.
So early 2020 to say April 2022, what's been that kind of upward right hockey stick growth that you've experienced? So how big is the team now? Major projects you've worked on, that type of thing.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is, when you first start, you put CEO on your LinkedIn and you have this impressive job title, and you're CEO of nothing, and you're doing everything.
Still carrying out the rubbish.
Yeah. You haven't got anybody to boss around. It's just you. So I had moved back in with my mom and dad, which was interesting as a 30-year-old grown up. Turns out I like them a lot more than I did when I was 15, and they're actually great.
Happens often.
But it meant it meant we could keep the burn rate really low. And then lockdown happened, kind of the first COVID wave, and it meant that working from home was a really amazing opportunity, right? And I just had hundreds of calls with prospective customers, literally hammering away on LinkedIn again, just kind of saying like, hey, I'm a CEO, I've just done this thing, can I have a chat with you? And basically selling them on a product that didn't exist, right? Being like, we're developing this thing, is it something you'd be interested in? Just to try and get that feedback on what they care about and what they don't care about. Heard a lot of really interesting things. We ended up, one of our first big breaks, and actually I'd be remiss to not mention as well, we applied to a couple of accelerators. One of them said no, and I was devastated. I was like, this is the end, we're done for. What am I doing here? Like, I remember I shed a little tear. I was like, I can't believe it, this is outrageous. And then you look back and you're like, oh, they're just one of many speed bumps in the road. But we got funding from the European Space Agency to kind of build out some of our capabilities using their sensors and satellites to monitor GHG emissions. And kind of, we got our first little bit of funding in from that. We got to hire a couple of interns. We then kind of converted some of these early interested parties into paying POCs, proof of concepts, with the startup. And we kept on going, and then I think we really spent about a year kind of just working on the early MVP. Gopal was coding it. I was finding the customer insights, having customer conversations, launched the MVP kind of summer 2021, closed our first couple of, high profile engagements, got our first round of real equity investment in kind of mid 2021. We closed a seed round, $3.2 million. And we've kind of been growing ever since then. We're now up to about 10 customers. We're converting these POCs into ARR. We're now 17 people, which seems wild. We're split. Gopal lives in San Francisco. I live in London. In COVID, that wasn't a problem. Now it's still not a problem, but we've chosen to build remote in the US, where they're mainly product and tech. The commercial team's mostly in London. And we're now looking to raise the next round of funding, going to be growing, if all goes well, to kind of 50, 60 people by the end of kind of mid 2023. So it's pedal to the metal, all systems go.
I'm just imagine though the value of the customer insights that you had from those 100 LinkedIn calls. Just how that really shaped your MVP. That is, so often people, I think, build the product and then they hope that it meets the need. But you had real time data, you had real feedback, real customer insights that said, hey, this is what we need. This is what we're looking for. This is the itch that you can scratch, specifically. And then you decide, does that fit in our niche or not? Is that in our wheelhouse? And I mean, just, I think that your product is just infinitely better, or would be infinitely better, because of all those calls. Would you
Yeah.
confirm that?
Yeah, and the process never stops, right? You kind of
right.
There's an interesting tension in that, right? Because there's like, is it like the Henry Ford quote, where it's like, if we asked customers what they wanted, they'd have told us they want a faster horse.
Exactly. I was thinking that very quote when you said that.
Yeah. But and like, there's no absolutes in venture and in tech, right? It's like in startups, there's nuance in everything. But one of the things I was really lucky with is, Gopal's a very experienced product lead and engineer, and he kept on saying to me, he was like, we're not going to invest money in building the MVP until we know that someone's going to buy it. And that led us to a point. We still have to do iterations, we're still kind of evolving. Sure. The opportunities change, but that mentality, I've heard it in other ways, say, wait until you see the whites in their eyes, kind of just waiting till as long as possible, because you only really get one shot at that first build. Just because resources are so scarce, like the opportunity cost is very present. We're all going without salary at that point. Like, it really pays to just slow down and think and measure twice and cut once. Yeah.
So I've got an interesting question here, and then I want to kind of transition into our mentor moment, part of the chat. But I'm really curious. So you said, you kind of alluded to the fact that, as a Brit, you're almost swimming upstream with this kind of entrepreneurial bent. Why do you think that you were this, the proverbial salmon that's swimming upstream here? What was in your DNA or in a life experience that happened that caused you to kind of, step out of the queue?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, maybe part of it was moving around a bit when I was younger. We moved to the US when I was between 9 and 14.
Oh, that's very impressionable time.
Very impressionable time. Not as though I was, never been to California until 5 years ago, right? Like, not as though I was exposed to the tech world, but I think traveling around.
The mentality, though.
Yeah. And in the UK, it's very subtle, but there is definitely kind of this classism, and there's very much like, you're told to become a lawyer or a doctor or a proper job, or a banker. Obviously, the City of London's there. I think a lot of it comes from maybe it's from my parents as well. My dad is he's a very positive person, which is again rare in the UK because we can often be a bit negative. But like, even today, I say to him, I'm worried about this thing. He's like, this is you. This is who you are. You're not. Don't take the normal path. Follow the path that you're compelled to take. There's a bit of that. There's a bit of ego. There's a bit of narcissism. Like every founder believes that they can change the world. Right. Like that, it's just true. But I think there's a duality, right? To do it really well. And I know this point doesn't deliberately answer your question, but it's like you need to both have a level of ego, but also a level of self-awareness. And it's kind of a hard balance to have, right? I think. Because on the one side, you can become a charlatan and kind of can probably raise lots of money, but then it all goes up in smoke. There's a couple of stories like that have happened recently in tech. And if you are too introspective and self-reflective, then you never get past first base. So yeah, it's an interesting melting pot of things. I guess as well, right? Like my mom and dad they're not religious in the classic sense, but they go to church. They with that kind of thing. There's a lot of like, and maybe it's the American thing because America is much more kind of spiritual in some ways than the UK, but like concepts like destiny, concepts like, God's got a plan for you, like all of these kind of things. And I haven't necessarily always bought into the religiosity of it, but like having that mindset then makes you to some extent, I think, seek, purpose and kind of lead an impactful life and you think about things in a different way. Like there's a great philosopher called Alain de Botton, right? And he talks about like kind of church for non-believers or church for atheists or something like that, religion for atheists. I think that's the book. And I think it's really interesting as well, because you realize a lot of the things that like the church and religion have done lots of terrible things, but also they've, you know, these kind of these things that come from our history and shape our history actually have really strong kind of societal kind of glue, and also kind of, I think, can help people think more altruistically, more about the impact of your life, think about things in a different way, getting off like the hedonistic treadmill. So it's a melting pot of lots of different things. Again, there's nuance, there's no one answer. But yeah, I reckon those kind of 3 or 4 things kind of push and pull you in certain ways and prod you into the person you are. You're right. So there's a Steve Jobs, I think it's the commencement speech at Stanford, right? It says, it's only when you look backwards that you connect the dots.
Yep. I wasn't going to mention this, but I have this personal theory about entrepreneurship and religion. So I look back at kind of the history of England about, I'm guessing somewhere in the 1600s. So there was the time where the Church of England, and there were the Puritans that wanted to, you know, refine the church from within. And then there was the separatists that said, we can't do that. We have to go start something new. And the Puritans tended to stay in the UK, and the separatists tended to go to new lands, and many of them went to the US. And I think that has kind of formed the American DNA of, you know, grabbing yourself by the bootstraps, starting something independently, you know. So I think there's a real parallel. It's interesting that you brought that up about, you know, just kind of the religion fiber, you know, and how that has crafted even societal DNA in so many ways. So that's just a big personal theory I have.
Yeah, and like the concept of faith, right, is a very religious thing, but I look at it almost in the context of startups, right? It's like faith is the evidence of things unseen.
Yep.
Right, and like some people choose to believe in God, they choose to believe in kind of Buddhism or Christianity or Islam, but like in startups, you kind of have to believe in things that don't exist yet, and you have to kind of. Everyone would say to you, why? Like I remember my friends when I became an entrepreneur, they're like, why don't you just get a normal job? Like this is, you know, why are you doing this? And it is this kind of compulsion and this kind of belief that you're right, and belief that there is this thing that you can come to. So yeah, it's a fascinating tangent that we could probably dive down for a very long time. But there's definitely aspects of human nature, right, that kind of align with those kind of broader themes of faith and belief, and pushing outside the box and breaking away from the kind of Puritan kind of conservative mindset, small c conservative.
No, for sure. And I've interviewed a number of Australian founders on Rising Tide, and I see a lot of parallel between the American mindset and the Aussie mindset, and I think they're we're both, we both went and as my British friends would call us, the renegade territories of the UK kingdom. They went and started.
I'm not sure they're allowed to say that anymore.
Started the new things. That's right. So anyway, I want to really transition into the kind of my favorite part of the interview, and that this is the mentor moment. And I just want like one or two really solid takeaways for our listeners that, as they wrap up, they didn't listen to anything else during the interview. This is really what we need to hone in on, and just say, speaking to people that may be a little further behind you in the journey, and the kind of the startup journey and founding things. And what are one or two real key nuggets that you wish you would have known when you started, that you think would be game changers? That, boy, I wish if I'd have known this when I started, this would have really changed the playing field, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, there are things I did right, and there are things that I would have learned. I think one of the things I did right is like a really, really boring but important one, which is like cover the downside and reduce your burn. Like really make sure that you can put yourself through the pain and the suffering, right? And
weather the storms.
Weather the storms. Maybe some people have dependents, and I was a single man when I started my startup journey, which with the help. But lots of people have kids and they make it work, and they have families, they make it work. But I think really covering those kind of downsides is really important, because it takes a lot longer than you would always think it would. I also think that nothing can prepare you for how brutal it is. An analogy I use with it is like, it's kind of like, like the MMA kind of cage fighting stuff that now has become really popular, right? It's like, you look at those people, you're like, why would anybody want to lock themselves in an octagon and get punched in the face repeatedly? And doing a startup's not dissimilar to that sometimes, right? Like, there's a lot of pain and suffering involved, and you get a kick out of it. That's what gets you going. And it's kind of, there's definitely some type of, maybe it's masochism. I'm not sure exactly what the right word would be, but like,
there you go.
Yeah, you've got to enjoy the pain, because it is tough and nothing can prepare you for it. I think you're never going to be right. You're only going to be less wrong. I think that's a really powerful framing of, like, I say that to the team all the time. I say that to everybody, right? It's like the purpose here isn't to be right, isn't to have everything perfect. Like, nothing can prepare you for it. So just do it, because you're going to make so many mistakes, and it's much better to make them early on than it is later on.
I love that.
I think also a mentor moment would be like finding mentorship and network. Not like classic, I am your mentor, you are my mentee, but like there's lots of people that really admire people that have the guts and people that have the faith to, go out and do the startup thing, right? There's a lot of people that maybe they've done it before, maybe they wish they'd done it, maybe they just recognize the brutality of it. But like, I was always constantly amazed how many people wanted to help out. Like, an example is, I reached out to, I did a search on LinkedIn for all of the ex-employees of a startup in this space that's kind of like a V1 version of the company that had since been acquired by one of the big data providers. And I just reached out to him and I was like, hey, I know you were the COO at this place before. The guy was just great. He said, yeah, happy to have a call, have a chat. He gave me some advice. 12 months later, he wrapped up his startup project and he said, hey, Josh, I loved the call. I love the fact that you just reached out to me. I'm looking for a new COO role. How about I come and work with Sust? So now our COO is the former COO of one of these kind of pioneers in the space. And it just came from reaching out to people, because like either they've done it before or they admire it. And like, people want to help. A lot of people want to help. A lot of people also want to shoot you down, mostly your friends, when they see you getting above your station. So you've got to take that with a pinch of salt. But yeah, there's a lot of good people in the world that just like to help out and think that startups are exciting.
Is it? It's interesting, because that's another thing you just mentioned about how often, sometimes it's our friends that shoot the friendly fire at us, But is it the intentionality, or is it the fact that their imaginations just can't get them there? That their own perspective and imagination just can't get to where you are, so it seems like scary to them, or it seems so foreign to them that they're like, man, and almost personifying it. So, well, I can't imagine myself doing it, so why are you doing it? Type thing.
I don't know if it's that. I think there's like, it's a cool thing to do when it works, right? Like, you're your own boss. You're now employing all these people. You're building really cool things. You're speaking at lots of engagements. You kind of have cred. And I think everybody has their superpowers that they can bring, and most people, I think, could have a role in startups if they wanted to. I think it comes back to that covering the downside thing for a lot of people, right? Like, some people choose to have a young family. They choose to prioritize security. They choose to provide. And these are all like, again, right? Going back to my family, like my mum and my dad have only ever provided that foundation for me to then, me and my sister, my sister runs a startup. I run a startup. Our parents are both pretty trad, right? They're pretty kind of solid people. My mum's a nurse. My dad worked in like marketing in IT. But like, there's nothing wrong with choosing the family life and prioritizing the people you love.
Right.
Like being an entrepreneur, you have ego, you have narcissism. But I think like for a lot of people, especially your peers, there is the mundaneness or the mundanity, I don't know what the right word is, of like doing the right thing by your family, for example. And if you haven't covered the downside, it's really hard to then imagine going out and doing the startup stuff. And I think, there is a bit of jealousy, but I kind of get it, right? And it's like, that could be me in a different life, it could be any of us. Like, I think circumstance, like it comes back to that kind of one big tip, right? It's like circumstance governs way more of our lives than we think. Like, the things in our life that are going on have way more of an impact than our drive or our determination. So for me, it was just stripping everything down and lowering the friction. So it was like, why would I not do this? I thought, look, I'm 30 years old. I'll do this for 5 years. I'll swing the bat. If I hit a home run, great. If I strike out, it's all right. There's still that life waiting for me. But some people don't have that opportunity to swing the bat.
See, it's that American influence. I mean, you said hit a home run instead of hit it for 6. I mean, you clearly, we put our DNA into you. You can't get away from it. So yeah, you have become one of us.
Anyways. Cricket, you stand around for a whole day. You stand around for 5 days in a field
and could end in a tie.
And you have a little tea break and a lunch break. So who has nothing better to do than watch 5 days of cricket? Go to the baseball, get some popcorn, get a hot dog. There's only nine innings. Then you're done.
And we'll get to a winner eventually. That's right. We won't quit playing until somebody wins. That is so
no
true.
Draws. So only true. Wins.
Josh, this has been such a pleasure. I appreciate, just if nothing else, I appreciate the idea that you just kind of cast a vision for, future founders that, you almost have, I want a t-shirt that says, why not? Why not try this? Why not do this? Reduce the downside, reduce the burn rate, put yourself in the best position to succeed, but go for it, at the end of the day. And what the worst case scenario, you have to go get a job at some point in time to kind of offset those, that attempt. But what's the old quote, something about I'd rather have tried and failed than have never tried at all. So it really
Theodore Roosevelt, The Man in the Arena. I encourage anybody to read that passage.
For sure. The other quote from that famous philosopher Mike Tyson, the boxer, when you were talking earlier, I was thinking, everybody's got a plan till you get punched in the face. So that is the life of a founder. Well, Josh, it's been a pleasure to chat with you today. I really appreciate you taking the time and hope that you can step into a great weekend there in the lovely city of London. But just thank you for really taking time and just helping all boats rise in a rising tide. Josh, have a great day.
Thanks so much.
Another episode in the books. We hope you heard some great takeaways. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a 5-star review on iTunes and YouTube. As always, thanks for listening to Rising Tide.